It's what non-car people don't get. They see all cars as just 1.5 tons, 2 tons of wires, glass, metal and rubber. That's all they see. People like you or I know, we have an unshakable belief that cars are living entities. Well, not a Toyota Corolla, obviously, but you can develop a relationship with a car, and that's what non-car people just don't get.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, so I kind of have this like notion that every single car has a story behind it, and that story is unique to every single car. No story is really the same, but they can be similar, and those stories consist of like how you bought the car, basically, like where you went. If you had to drive far, maybe it was a block, maybe it was 1,000 miles. You know, it doesn't matter. That's part of the story. That's part of like how you got that car. And if you're a car guy, that's something you never forget. Like I remember distinctly that I went to Wisconsin to get my car, and it was like it was about an 1.5 hour drive to Wisconsin, like right by Lake Michigan. And it was this really like wealthy doctor guy, and he was selling the car because he just had he had a baby, and his wife was pregnant with twins, so he had to get rid of the car like that day, kind of. I couldn't even drive the car home because I didn't know how to drive stick. My dad had to drive it home for me. So I remember like the ride home, like, you know, we couldn't even like drive it that well first because my dad hadn't driven stick in like 6 years or something like that, and I had never driven it. So it was kind of like a fun ride on the way home, and we definitely did like 120, miles an hour like on the ride home, like just to see like what it could do. And those are just like those memories that I remember about my car on the first day that we bought it. That are just like, I remember every detail of that, and that's definitely part of the story of this car that I'm sure other car guys can just relate to.
There was a guy called Charles Babbage who invented the computer back in the 18th century who talked about the unerring certainty of machinery. Okay, now the problem you have is that when you have the unerring certainty of machinery, it is a machine. When something has foibles and won't handle properly, that gives it a particularly human quality because it makes mistakes. And that's how you can build a relationship with a car that other people won't get.
So I strongly agree with the idea that you can completely develop a connection with your car, almost like it's another person. And that's something that I think is very unique to car people, like if you're really in love with your car. Because I don't think many people, if I said that to your average person who just, drives to work and all they do is get groceries, drive to work, whatever they do in their car, they're not going to understand that. They're not going to understand that connection that someone has with a car. And it's so many different things. This car doesn't have a lot of electrical assistant things. I mean, it has ABS and that's about it. It has traction control, which I routinely turn off in the summer just because it's way more fun to drive. And the car starts to develop a personality when the traction control's off. When you're turning, just going to school or whatever, you might give it a little extra gas in a turn, and the ass end might kick out a little bit. And it's just like that's the personality of the car. It's kind of like a wild beast. If you're not careful with it, it can bite you in the ass. You could go too hard and it could spin out in the middle of a street. Those are characteristics of the car that as you drive it more, you start learning more about those kinds of things. Like when you're just cruising down the road, the gear shifter, it shakes. It's just a characteristic of the car. Most all manual cars do that. The gear shifter shakes when it's in gear. And so when you tell somebody like you have this connection to your car, and it's hard to explain, I think if you say just that to another car person, that they understand it. Nothing else needs to really be said. They're just like, yeah, I totally understand that. But if you say that same thing to a non-car person, they'll think you're crazy. They're not gonna understand what the hell you're talking about. And I understand that. It's funny. It's like it's our own language almost. So I mean, this car is completely daily driven. It's seen 3 pretty nasty Chicago winters. Chicago's winter was basically the worst winter recorded since like the 40 years ago when the massive one came. And we had like Lakeshore Drive, which is a pretty relatively famous road, I guess, was completely shut down. Like there was hundreds of cars abandoned on the road. Like that's the kind of stuff we go through in Chicago winters. What's interesting to me is a lot of people, especially from the southern states where car stuff is really, really big, because of the fact that it doesn't snow. California, Texas, Florida, those states have a lot of car presence and a lot of like import presence, kind of like this car, because of the fact that it doesn't get cold down there. I mean, it gets cold, but it doesn't snow. It doesn't snow 12 inches. We got like 6 inches or 7 inches on one day this year, and luckily this car stayed in the garage, but it still saw snow this year. It's seen snow the last 2 years. I've driven it to school when it was like icy and a disaster. And I'm leaving the garage down my alley, and I almost swerve into like 10 different garbage cans trying to leave with, and traction control I leave on, obviously. I'm in like 3rd gear doing 5 miles an hour down the alley, just swerving into everything. And that's something that, people in the southern states just don't experience. We don't have any car meets for about 5 months. We have 0 car meets. It's just a dead in the water scene. Nothing happens. Down south, and you have all these meets, maybe they remember every single meet, or maybe because they don't have that off season, all the meets kind of run together. Maybe they keep having so many meets, so they all just start to run together. When you have that off season, it's like I distinctly remember right now last year's first car meet. I remember it was at some big parking lot somewhere, and there was definitely a really, really big turnout, and my car looked a little bit like this, a little bit different. It was lowered and on these rims, and that was the first time I was showing this car off at a meet like that. And I remember a ton of attention. I remember seeing a bunch of my friends that I hadn't seen in a long time for the first time. And I remember a lot of stuff like that. I remember the first meets of the year. I remember my first S2000 only meet. It was right by an airfield in a really cool spot, and that was the first time I basically met a bunch of people with the same car. And that just adds in more to the personality of the car and to it having its own persona, because whenever I'm in this car, I remember those things. It's like you can't unforget them, and they're good memories. It's a cool thing that, again, is just really, really hard to explain to somebody. But if you explain it to any kind of car guy, it's just like second nature. It doesn't even need explaining. It's just like, yeah, we know. I can't wait for the 2012 car season. It's going to be pretty awesome. We had Week Fest last year, and I'm sure, I hope that returns this year, and it'll be a little more known from last year, so hopefully that'll be a really big event. I know another level car show is coming back this year, which I'm super excited about. That should be a pretty good show. Every year since that's been started, it's been getting bigger and bigger to the point where like it's huge now. It's a really big deal. I can't wait to just drive down Lakeshore Drive. That's like the funnest feeling for me, just to drive down a road. It sounds stupid, I know, but it's this feeling when you're driving your car with friends or with other S2000s. It's a really cool feeling. I can't wait for the season, for the car season to get going.